Okay, welcome back, game designers. This is take two. I already did this video and realized that, well, I didn't share my screen, so that was a real problem. So there may be some things that you'll notice on my screen that isn't consistent with what you'll see on yours, but we'll do the best we can. So my point or my goal of this video is to create an enemy template so that I can use, if I know there's going to be programming that's going to be repeating or redundant for each enemy, I only have to type it once, and then I can really focus on the unique qualities or the unique variables and things that are involved in that specific enemy, and not just keep typing the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to create a whole new scene, and the scene the node type I'm going to use is area 2D, and I'm going to call this enemy template. And my enemy is going to have a sprite, but in this case, I'm just loading a placeholder sprite. And so when you go to your assets, you can use anything you want. But in this case, I'm just going to choose the first one. And I'm going to give my enemy a collision shape just to get rid of the error, but it's not actually going to really matter much if my enemy template has a collision or not, because this thing is actually not going to, as a template, is not going to enter into my game. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. So I'm going to create a new script, and it's going to be enemy template. Now I know all of my enemies are going to have some variables that they're all going to share. And so because I've done this already, I even printed it out to make sure that this video has the least amount of mistakes. So I know all enemies are going to need a speed. And just to show you something later, I'm going to assign it a value, even though that's not actually going to be the value that I want to go with. I'm going to give it a direction, and that's just going to be an empty vector 2. I know that I'm going to assign a point value, so how much each enemy is worth when you destroy it. Each enemy is going to need to be aware of room size, and each enemy is going to have to be aware of its sprite offset. Now these are very similar to values or variables you'd see in GameMaker. Godot doesn't have nearly as many built-in variables, which I think allows it to run faster than GameMaker. But in the effort of keeping it as similar to my demos in class as possible, I am going to leave it being as close to possible, as close as I can. I also know that later on I'm going to want to admit a signal to add points to the score. So I'm going to create that signal even though you might not see me use it in this video. So in the ready function, I know all enemies are going to want to do certain things. All enemies are going to want to get the room size. So get viewport rect dot size. I would like my enemy to be aware of its sprite offset. So offset equals get node sprite texture get size divided by 2. So that's just finding the center of my sprite, similar to what we do in GameMaker. In GameMaker, this would be X and Y offset, but in Godot, it's a vector 2. So the sprite offset is going to have an X and a Y, both divided by 2. I'm also going to want to make some connections for my signals. So I'm going to call that function that doesn't exist yet. And then the last one is going to allow me to load unique variables. And these are variables that are specific to that object, its specific properties. So why don't I go ahead and create the function make connections. And there's going to be 2 connections that I want to focus on. Number 1, I want to connect the function area entered. Area 2D has several, if I click on it, has several signals, and area entered is one of them. And so that's the one I want to connect. So area entered is going to connect to itself, and I'm going to need to create a function on area entered at some point to deal with any time another area 2D enters the collision shape. It's going to be able to handle that collision. And I'm going to connect my custom signal, add score, and that's going to be added to the parent, which is going to be the game. So get parent. And I'm going to need to create a new function in the game node and that's probably going to be something like update score. So those connections will be made as soon as this function is called. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to want it to be able to load custom or unique variables. So load unique variables. In this case, in the template, I'm just going to say pass. That'll do a couple things. It will get rid of an error, and then I got a typo, and it'll also allow me to customize that down the road. So in my process function, remember that happens every frame. I do want the position of my object or my enemy to update. So position is going to be affected by, or plus equals, direction times speed times delta. And delta, again, make sure that regardless of how powerful a computer that you are working with, the frame rate will appear to be equal on a mega computer versus a piece of junk. So while I'm here, I'm also going to add on area entered, and I'm going to want Godot to collect the information about the area that enters the collision, because I might want it to respond differently if it's the player, if it's the player's bullet, if it's a fellow enemy. So I want to be able to collect that information about the collider. And so in this case, I might say, just for default, HP minus equals 1, so it'll take 1 away from the hit points, which I haven't defined yet. And I'm just going to say print a message, area has been entered, so that we can check to make sure that this connection has been made. Now, I can run the enemy template scene. I do have to save it, so save scene as enemy template. And if I just want to run the scene, not the entire game, so this arrow will run the entire game, will run the base node. But if I just want to run this scene, I can click on this little scene clacker, I think it's called. And when I click on that, you can see that my enemy doesn't go anywhere, and that's because he doesn't have a speed, he doesn't have a direction, but he is there. We can actually look at his properties. So if I didn't mean to close it, if I run this again, and I move our screen out of the, oh, I clicked the game, run the game, not the scene. So we're running just the scene. I can come over here now. Currently it's local, but I want to go to remote, and that will allow me to click on the specific things in my scene. And if I click on my enemy template and go to inspector, I can actually look at all of the variables. So the template, you'll notice, has a speed of 0. It does collect the room size as a vector 2. Direction is 0. The point value is null, means it has not been assigned anything. That also is true for the HP. And those are things I'll define in the load unique variables. It also gives me an offset similar to GameMaker, in that it gives you an X and a Y where that's basically where it's been centered. So I'm done with that scene, and now I want to actually create an enemy I'm going to put in my game. So I'm going to create a new scene. It is going to be built off of Area 2D. I'll call this Enemy 1, and I will have to give it a sprite. Now this time, the sprite that I choose should be one that I want to appear in the game. Maybe later we'll make it so that it can choose any of these selections. But right now that would make this video too long. I'm going to give it a collision shape, and a square or rectangle works just fine. And yeah, I'm pretty much sure that this is ready to go. And what I'm going to do is, instead of creating a brand new script, when I click attach script, I am actually going to come up here and say inherit from the enemy template. And so all of the enemy template code from here is now automatically put into my enemy 1 script. So all of that's going to be here. So really, to show you that it's working, I can say function load unique variables. And now I can start putting in the variables that were either showing up as 0 or null. So for example, HP, it's going to be 1. It's going to have 1 hit point. The direction is going to be vector to down, which is a that's a recent addition to Godot, not having to say 0 on the X and 1 on the Y. Down is the equivalent. I'm going to need to give it a point value. So point value is going to be equal to, we'll say you get 10 points for destroying it. And what are my other member variables? Let's see. So speed, HP, so it looks like I need to give it a speed. And so speed for now is going to be equal to 100. So it's going to load all of these things. Now remember the template, when we ran the game, there was a lot of things that were either zeros or nulls over here, and we're going to see that those things actually get populated now. So I'm going to save this as enemy 1, and I'm just going to run the enemy 1 scene. And now, because we've added some things, our enemy does move. Now, one thing I might want to add to the template is doing something if we know that the object is moving down, but it's off the bottom of our screen. So I'm going to say here, if position.y is greater than room size.y plus the sprite offset.y, then we're going to say out of room destroying, and we're going to have it queue free, which is equivalent of instance destroy in GameMaker. So let me just make sure I did that right. I did forget one detail, that we have to check that direction is equal to vector 2 down, and that bit of information is true. So you'll notice that you have to use 2 equals whenever you're asking Godot to check to make sure that something is exactly something else. So you can use greater than and equal to, less than and equal to, but if it has to be precisely this, you have to use 2 equals or you'll get an error. So let's see if all that works. Oh, we'll also see if it detects a collision with the player, except I forgot to put it in the room. So let me do that. Let me go back to our game scene now. We are going to choose the game 2D or node 2D game node as our parent. We're going to instance in one enemy, put it so it will collide. So there's 2 things I want to see. I want to see if it will detect collision with the player by printing area has been entered. And I also want to see that it will destroy itself when it gets to the bottom of the room. So now instead of running just the enemy scene, I want to run the entire game. And let's see if all those connections are working properly and things are going right. And so we have a collision and we have the object leaving the screen, and let's see if it printed both of those things. Area has been entered and out of room destroying, all are working. So our enemy template has a lot of information and coding that all of our enemies are going to use, but when we started programming our enemy, we only had to do this. When we do enemy 2, which is going to be a shooting enemy, we only have to add to, we only have to build off of this. We don't have to retype all of this information. And we can even have an enemy coming up from the bottom. So let me do that real fast. Usually this is one of the last enemies you enter or add to the game. So I'm going to call this enemy 4. And enemy 4 is actually going to move up from the bottom of the screen. And so it's texture. In this case, I'm going to use a red enemy, and it's facing the wrong direction. So I'm going to go to transform, rotation degrees, and set that to 180. So he's facing the right way, and he does need a collision shape. I chose the wrong thing, and it's parented wrong. So I'm going to go to, I can either erase it, or I can change type, and collision shape is what I wanted there. Got to rename it. that was probably the hard way to do that. Give it a shape, rectangle, and make that a little bit bigger, and attach the template. And now all I'm going to do is load unique variables, and HP equals 1. Direction is going to be the biggest difference, and that's going to be vector 2 up. Point value, I'm going to say is 15. And what's the other? Oh, speed equals. And in this case, I don't want him to move quite as fast because he is attacking from behind. And I figure if he's going in the same direction as the player, it might be a little harder to catch up. So now we have this enemy. I'm going to save scene as enemy 4. And you can see that we just very, very quickly added a new enemy into our game. So let's go into 2D mode, and I'm going to put instance in an enemy 4, and he's going to come from here. And now we should be able to see both enemies enter our game. Except I don't see enemy 4 moving. I don't know. What did I forget to add? Oh, he's a child. He's a child of the wrong thing. So I'm going to reparent, make the game his parent, and hopefully that's going to fix it, because he was a parent of, or a child of. Oh, so anyways, that works. And you can see that things are working just fine. So by creating a template, we have created some code that exists and we can inherit from, and that should cut down on some time, the amount of time it takes us to implement each enemy. So that's going to end